I was 9 months pregnant when I sat in a courtroom preparing to end my marriage. My husband sat across from me, looking strangely calm. For 6 months, he'd insisted our baby wasn't his. He told his family. He told our friends. And now he was telling the court. The humiliation had nearly destroyed me. I thought that day would be the final chapter of a painful betrayal. Then the courtroom doors opened. An elderly woman walked inside carrying a small envelope. She looked directly at the judge and said one sentence. The judge froze. My husband's face turned white. And suddenly, everything changed. The day my husband accused me of carrying another man's child, I was standing in the nursery folding tiny baby clothes. I remember staring at a pair of pink socks while trying to understand what he had just said. Emma, I don't think this baby is mine. At first, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. Daniel and I had been married for 4 years. We had spent nearly a year trying to have a baby. We celebrated together when the pregnancy test finally showed 2 pink lines. This child was wanted. Loved. Planned. At least, that's what I thought. Daniel didn't laugh. His face remained cold. Serious. Almost distant. Mom showed me something, he said quietly. That sentence changed everything. His mother, Patricia, had always been polite to my face, but I knew she never truly liked me. In her eyes, I wasn't good enough for her son. My family wasn't wealthy. I didn't come from the social circles she admired. For years, Daniel defended me. Until now. According to Patricia, the timeline of my pregnancy didn't make sense. She had somehow convinced Daniel that the dates proved I must have been involved with someone else. The accusation felt like a slap. Not because it was true, because the man I loved was actually considering it. Over the following weeks, our home became a battlefield of silence. Daniel stopped touching my growing belly, stopped asking about doctor appointments, stopped talking about baby names. Every joyful moment of my pregnancy disappeared. Soon, Patricia's doubts spread beyond our house. Family gatherings became uncomfortable. Friends started acting strangely around me. I could feel people judging me without saying a word. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, Daniel handed me divorce papers. My hands shook as I stared at them. You're really doing this? I whispered. He couldn't even look me in the eye. I can't stay in a marriage when I don't know the truth. The words shattered something inside me. 6 months later, I was 9 months pregnant, sitting in a courtroom preparing to sign those papers. I thought the worst part of my life was about to end. I had no idea it was only beginning. The morning of the hearing felt strangely quiet. Maybe it was because I had cried so much over the previous 6 months that I had no tears left. Or maybe it was because I had finally accepted that my marriage was over. Either way, I sat alone at the plaintiff's table, one hand resting on my swollen stomach, trying to stay calm. Across the courtroom sat Daniel. The man who once spent hours talking to our unborn daughter through my belly now couldn't even look at me. Beside him sat Patricia. And unlike Daniel, she looked completely comfortable, confident, almost victorious. The hearing began exactly as I expected. Lawyers spoke. Documents were reviewed. Questions were asked. Every minute felt heavier than the last. Then Daniel's attorney brought up the issue that had destroyed everything. Paternity. Even hearing the word made my stomach twist. The lawyer carefully explained Daniel's concerns and repeated the timeline Patricia had been pushing for months. As he spoke, Patricia nodded along confidently from her seat. I lowered my eyes. Not because I was ashamed. Because I was exhausted. I was tired of defending myself against a lie. The judge was preparing to move forward when the courtroom doors suddenly opened. The sharp sound echoed through the room. Every head turned. An elderly woman slowly stepped inside carrying a small envelope. The moment I recognized her, I sat up straighter. Margaret Sullivan, Daniel's grandmother. At 81 years old, she rarely attended family events anymore. In fact, I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. She walked toward the front of the courtroom with surprising determination. Patricia immediately stiffened. For the first time all morning, her confidence disappeared. Your Honor, Margaret said respectfully. I apologize for interrupting, But before this hearing continues, there is something you need to see. The judge looked surprised. So important that it couldn't wait? Margaret nodded. Yes. The courtroom fell silent. The bailiff carried the envelope to the judge. As he opened it, I noticed something strange. His expression changed, then changed again. Daniel leaned forward. Patricia suddenly looked pale. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The silence inside the courtroom felt unbearable. No one spoke as the judge carefully examined the documents Margaret had provided. Page after page, his expression grew more serious. Finally, he looked up. Mrs. Sullivan, would you like to explain exactly what these documents show? Margaret nodded. Then she turned toward Patricia. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Years of family history seemed to hang in the air between them. When Margaret finally broke the silence, her voice was calm but firm. These documents prove that Patricia knowingly provided false information to her son. A wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. Daniel's head snapped toward his mother. What is she talking about? Patricia immediately shook her head. She's confused. But Margaret wasn't finished. She explained that several months earlier, Patricia had visited her asking questions about family records and dates related to Daniel and me. At the time, Margaret hadn't thought much about it. Later, however, she discovered that Patricia had deliberately changed important details when discussing those records with Daniel. Dates had been altered. Facts had been twisted. Information had been presented out of context, all to support a story that simply wasn't true. The judge reviewed another document before speaking. According to these records, the timeline used to question paternity was completely inaccurate. My heart pounded. Daniel looked stunned. For months, he had treated Patricia's claims as undeniable proof. Now that proof was falling apart in front of everyone. Then Margaret revealed the part nobody expected. Patricia had never trusted me. Not from the beginning. She had wanted Daniel to marry someone from a wealthy family she approved of. When he chose me instead, she spent years hiding her disappointment behind polite smiles. When my pregnancy was announced, she saw an opportunity. A chance to separate us. A chance to finally push me out of Daniel's life. Suddenly, Patricia stood up. That's not true. But the panic in her voice said otherwise. The judge looked directly at her. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom realized the same thing. The lie that destroyed my marriage had never come from me. It had come from her. Patricia's outburst echoed through the courtroom. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The judge remained silent, studying her carefully. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel slowly stood from his chair. His face was pale. His hands trembled. For months, he had blamed me. For months, he had watched me cry, defend myself, and carry our child alone. And now he was realizing that every accusation had been built on a lie. Mom, he said quietly. Patricia avoided his eyes. Daniel, sit down. They're twisting everything. But he didn't sit. Instead, he looked at the documents spread across the judge's desk. Then he looked at me. I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a very long time. Shame. Deep, painful shame. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Sullivan's evidence appears credible. These records directly contradict the claims that led to this divorce proceeding. Patricia suddenly became desperate. She started speaking rapidly, trying to explain, trying to justify, trying to blame everyone except herself. Then, in her frustration, she made a mistake. A huge one. I only did what any mother would do, she shouted. She was never good enough for my son. The courtroom froze. There it was. The truth. Not concern. Not confusion. Not a misunderstanding. Pure prejudice. Years of resentment exposed in a single sentence. Before anyone could react, Margaret stepped forward. The 81-year-old woman looked heartbroken. Then she raised her hand and delivered a sharp slap across Patricia's cheek. The sound cracked through the courtroom. Gasps erupted from every corner of the room. Patricia stared at her in shock. Margaret's voice trembled with disappointment. That young woman loved this family more than you ever did. No one spoke. No one needed to. The slap itself wasn't what shocked the courtroom. It was what it revealed. In one instant, every excuse disappeared. Every lie collapsed. Every hidden motive stood exposed. The judge called for order, but the damage was already done. Patricia's secret was no longer a secret, and Daniel was finally forced to face the devastating cost of trusting the wrong person. Outside the courtroom, a decision awaited him, one that would determine whether our family had any future at all.